Hello everyone. Welcome to Decoder Box. There's one thing that's clear. Life's challenges and dangers are ever present, causing anxiety whenever we must confront them. Women and children, in particular, remain the most vulnerable, especially in today's world, where hidden threats lurk everywhere. Among them, young girls face the constant risk of sexual abuse, a problem that has persisted through generations, with no clear solution in sight. Today, we bring you the story of young girls whose ability to protect themselves is tragically limited. These girls are still out there, enduring both physical and emotional suffering. If this is your first time here, we encourage you to support us by liking and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps drive our mission forward. The mysterious disappearance of young girls. It was the summer of 2009 in Hac Long Giang Province, China. The air was filled with the familiar buzz of cicadas, and the weather had grown much warmer than the previous month. When the cold still lingered, the days were brighter, and people moved faster, yet a sense of unease hung in the air. For months, a series of mysterious disappearances had dominated the news, casting a shadow over the otherwise peaceful summer. What troubled the public the most was that all the victims were young girls, aged between 17 and 22, living and working in the province. The first to disappear was Kieu Dinh, sometime in late February 2009. Her family, distraught and desperate, contacted the police in Heihe District, hoping for answers. At just 17 years old, Kieu Dinh had a rebellious streak. Frustrated with her family, she left home one day and didn't return for 3 days. Initially, her family, still upset, tried to ignore the situation, but as the days stretched on, their anger turned to worry. After 2 days without any news from her, they frantically reached out to the authorities, pleading for help. The police acted swiftly, collecting all available information about Kieu Dinh. They issued missing person alerts, spreading them across digital platforms and local newspapers throughout the province. But as the months passed, there was still no trace of Kieu Dinh. To make matters worse, more reports of disappearances began to surface from nearby districts, deepening the growing fear. Among those missing were Lac Tin Shuyan, 20, from Hac Long District, Tao, Michigan 19, from Heihe District, Dien Ton, 22, from Gaimusu District, Neep Ton, 19, and the most recent case, Maklai, 21, from Heihe District. All of these young women had vanished without a trace, creating an atmosphere of insecurity that gripped the entire province. Families, especially those with daughters, were living in a state of constant fear. Unsure of who might be next, the news outlets continued to intensively report on the mysterious disappearances, putting pressure on local authorities to intensify their investigation efforts. Police officers took the situation with the utmost seriousness, heightening their vigilance. The suitcase containing the body. On the morning of May 17, 2009, Hac Long District Police received a call from a local resident regarding a suspicious suitcase discovered deep in the forest. The caller, a middle-aged man named Lai Kwong, had heard about the recent disappearances and believed this could be a vital clue. During a picnic with his family, his daughter on summer break, they ventured into a pine forest on the outskirts of Hac Long District. They had wandered off the main road, surrounded by thick trees, to take some photos in a quiet, deserted area. As Lai Kwong's daughter posed for a picture, they were startled by the loud cawing of crows and vultures nearby. Curious, the family followed the sound deeper into the forest. It wasn't long before they were met with an overwhelming stench, one that reminded them of decaying animal carcasses. Intrigued yet wary, they followed the bird calls. After a short walk down a narrow path heading southeast, they spotted something unusual, a large, black suitcase nestled against the trunk of an old pine tree in an isolated part of the forest. The crows and vultures that had gathered flew off as the family approached. The suitcase was soaked, and insects swarmed over it, flies and ants crawling over the surface. Lai Kwang's daughter screamed, terrified, and clung to her parents, pleading with them not to go near the suitcase. Feeling an ominous presence, Lai Kwang and his wife stayed calm and made the decision to leave the area immediately. Once they regained cell phone service, they contacted the Hac Long police for assistance. At 1 p.m. that same day, the police arrived at the location described by Lai Kwang. They followed his directions and found the suitcase exactly where it had been left, drenched and slightly torn, likely by animals trying to get inside. The investigators carefully opened it, revealing a horrifying sight. Inside was the body of a young woman, grotesquely crammed into the suitcase. Her limbs were bound with rope, deep marks cutting into her skin, now a dark, purple-black, clear signs of brutal abuse before death. Her face was disfigured, and her eyes were frozen wide open, as if in terror at the moment of her murder. A large piece of cloth was still stuffed in her mouth, used to silence her cries for help. The victim's body had been wrapped tightly in an old blanket, stained with dried blood and damp patches that hadn't yet fully evaporated. Her arms were twisted unnaturally, forced into this confined space, while her legs were bent in a crouched position, bound with the same rope that left deep marks across her pale skin. It was clear from the bruises and lacerations across her body, particularly on her neck and wrists, that she had endured immense suffering before her death. Her clothes were shredded, covered in dirt and blood that had turned an ominous black. Her hair, once neatly kept, was now disheveled and foul-smelling, with patches of her scalp exposed. The sight was both tragic and horrifying, leaving a haunting impression on everyone at the scene. As soon as the suitcase was opened, a powerful stench of decomposition, mixed with the dampness of the blanket and the suitcase, hit everyone present. The smell was so overwhelming that some of the investigators had to hold their breath, while others couldn't help but vomit on the spot. The Lee family, standing nearby, was frozen in horror, unable to bear the sight or the smell, staying at a distance in sheer terror. Based on the level of decomposition, investigators preliminarily concluded that the victim had likely died about 2 days earlier. It was painfully clear that this was a murder. The tragic and unjust nature of her death fueled the determination of the investigative team to bring the perpetrator to justice. Revealing the victim's identity. On the victim's arm, they found a bracelet with a small silver plate engraved with the name Tan. This matched the name of one of the girls recently reported missing, Diane Tan, 22 years old, from Jai Mok 2 District. Before transferring the body to the Hac Long police station for further examination, the investigative team immediately contacted the Jai Mok 2 police and local authorities to gather more information about Diane Tan and confirm whether the victim found in the suitcase was indeed her. By 5 p.m. on May 17th, the body had been transported to the Hac Long police station, after hours of investigation and the difficult task of moving the remains. The Hac Long police awaited their colleagues from Jai Mok Tuesday. Around 6 p.m., the team arrived with full documentation on Diane Tan, who had been reported missing just days earlier. Accompanying them was her brother, Diane Tin, who had come to confirm her identity. His face was tight with tension, but he did his best to stay composed. After hearing the details from the Hac Long police, he was prepared for the grim task ahead. However, the moment Diane Tin laid eyes on the body, he froze in shock, though something about the figure was familiar to him. His mind resisted accepting that his sister could have ended up in such a horrifying state. Despite his denial, the bracelet on her arm confirmed his worst fear. This was indeed his sister. Her tattered clothes provided further confirmation. Overcome with grief, Diane Tin lost control. He clutched his head, screaming in agony, and began to lash out, smashing nearby objects in a frenzy of heartbreak and rage. The police quickly intervened, restraining him before things escalated further. Recognizing his fragile emotional state, They led him to a medical room where they administered a sedative to help calm him. Dian Tin eventually fell into a deep sleep by around 11 p.m. After the sedative had worn off, the police from both districts waited for him to awaken, giving him time to become alert enough to provide his statement. They stayed late into the night, prepared to speak with him once he had regained enough composure to continue. Dian Tin was escorted into the interrogation room, his eyes hollow but burning with a deep resentment. He appeared dazed, like a man who had lost his soul. As he sat down, he took a deep breath and said, "I'm ready." The police from both districts worked together to take his statement, asking about his sister Dian Tan's disappearance and her life before it. Dian Tin began by explaining that their parents had died in an accident in 1997. At the time, he was just 18, and Dian Tan was only 8 years old. From that day on, he had taken on the role of both brother and guardian, raising her on his own. In 2004, when Dian Tan turned 17, Dian Tin got married. Knowing how much her brother had sacrificed for her, Dian Tan decided not to continue her education. She graduated from high school and asked her brother if she could work at a restaurant with her friends instead of pursuing further studies. With a family of his own to care for, including a wife and young son, Dian Tin was struggling under a heavy financial burden. Reluctantly, he allowed his sister to stop studying and begin working. Their lives carried on like this. Dian Tin made a living by selling fish along the rivers of Hac Long Giang, while Dian Tan moved out to rent her own place after turning 18. At the end of April, Dian Tin had to leave the province to trade seafood. His wife was occupied with work and caring for their child, so they didn't check on Dian Tan regularly. When Dian Tin returned home around May 5th, he discovered that his sister was missing. Fearing that she had become another victim in the recent string of disappearances, Dian Tin and his wife immediately reported it to the police in Jimak-2 district. For 12 agonizing days, they searched, but what Dian Tin feared most came true. He found his sister, but in the most horrific way imaginable. Grief-stricken, he pleaded with the authorities to seek justice for her brutal death. The investigative team allowed Dian Tin to return home early in the morning on May 18th. Meanwhile, Dian Tan's body remained at the forensic office for further examination. The call asking for help. During the wait for the forensic results, police forces from both areas coordinated with investigation teams across the districts of Hac Long Giang Province to track down the missing girls. Realizing the urgency of the situation and the likelihood of more cases like Dian Tan's, law enforcement from Hac Ha, Kute, Jimak Tuesday, and Hac Quang districts intensified their search efforts. Their first move was to post notices in various newspapers and call on citizens across the province to assist in the search. The campaign gained swift momentum, sparking widespread public outrage. The community united, determined to help the authorities find the missing victims and bring the culprits to justice. The next day, Hac Quang District Police received a distress call from an unknown number. The caller, a resident of Song A.P. Sun District, reported that a young girl had managed to escape from a kidnapping gang. She had been fortunate enough to encounter a group of locals who were transporting wood in their truck. They had stopped and helped the girl hide in the back, giving her a brief chance to contact the police. Once the girl had calmed down, the investigators gently asked her for more information and immediately contacted the police in Hac Quang District. The investigation team swiftly arrived at the address provided by the resident. The man who had made the call was Don Khan, a 50-year-old wood trader, and the girl who had escaped was Ma Lam, a 23-year-old ethnic Hui woman living and working in Hac Quang. Ma Lam revealed that she worked as a promoter at a local bar. 7 days earlier, on the early morning of May 11th, while walking home through a deserted alley, she sensed someone was following her. She turned around but saw nothing. Feeling uneasy, she quickened her pace. Soon after, a man dressed in black appeared out of nowhere and covered her face with a chloroform-soaked cloth. Everything went black from that moment until she woke up, tied in a wooden house with 3 other girls, deep in the woods, with no sign of an escape. The girls were kept bound for days, only untied briefly for meals and bathroom breaks. Even then, they were under constant watch, too frightened to make any attempt to resist. The kidnappers were rough and short-tempered, leaving the girls feeling helpless and terrified. Then, around noon on May 17th, the captors tied the girls back up and loaded them into the back of a truck. They appeared to be in a rush, nervous about something, though they didn't say where they were taking them. However, by the evening, halfway through their journey, the truck broke down, the engine failed, and a flat tire forced them to stop near the edge of a forest. By the early hours of May 18th, Ma Lam sensed an opportunity. Overwhelmed with the need to escape, she asked the kidnappers to untie her so she could use the bathroom. They hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. Unable to refuse her request to relieve herself outside the truck, Ma Lam asked to go to a secluded spot, away from the group. Unbothered by her desire for privacy, the kidnappers let her move behind some bushes. Taking advantage of their distraction, Ma Lam slipped into the dense foliage and made a desperate run for it. Minutes later, the captors realized she was gone and began chasing her through the forest. Fortunately, Ma Lam managed to hide behind a large tree, and as they split up to search in different directions, she seized the chance to flee. She ran nonstop until, by the afternoon, she finally stumbled onto a small road that led out of the forest. Exhausted, she collapsed on the roadside. That's when Don Khan, the wood trader, found her. He took her in, and once she arrived at his house, Ma Lam fainted from hunger and exhaustion. It wasn't until the afternoon of May 19th that she regained consciousness and asked Don Khan to call the police. The investigation team immediately invited Ma Lam for further questioning. She explained that although she hadn't seen her captors' faces clearly when they first took her, she had a better look over the following days, but none of them seemed familiar. She overheard snippets of conversation and learned that the girls were being kidnapped for someone referred to as On Ba, Brother 3, though she had no idea who this person was. Partly because she had been so focused on escaping, Ma Lam hadn't had the chance to gather much information about the ringleader. However, when asked to describe the wooden house and the vehicle used for transport, she provided some key details. The house, she recalled, was built in a Russian style, with domed roofs, large windows, and intricate blue and white decorations. Outside, there was an orange bougainvillea and a white wooden fence. As for the truck that transported the girls, it was a relatively new blue Dongfeng. While Ma Lam couldn't remember the license plate number, she did notice a red sticker on the left side of the truck that read Harbin. This led her to believe the vehicle belonged to someone from the Harbin district. With these details in hand, the investigation team intensified their search, combing through the dense forests in R.a.p.e.d Sun District to locate the house Ma Lam had described. However, the search was fraught with difficulty due to the dense vegetation and the remote nature of the forest. The team speculated that the mastermind behind this operation must be a figure of considerable power, running such a well-organized kidnapping ring, complete with trained henchmen and a hidden hideout, required significant resources and influence. This wasn't the work of common criminals. It was a calculated and carefully orchestrated crime. Meanwhile, police in other districts began to uncover troubling signs of document forgery and deliberate cover-ups. As reports on the missing persons were sent to the provincial police headquarters for further review, detectives noticed that some of the documents had been tampered with or were improperly processed. It became increasingly clear that someone was deliberately obstructing the investigation. These discoveries raised suspicions that the upper ranks of the authorities might be compromised. In response, the task force began discreetly monitoring the actions of higher officials, suspecting possible corruption or involvement at a high level. At this point, the task force was juggling three critical missions: locating the house deep in the woods, keeping a close watch on officials, and awaiting the results of Diane Tan's autopsy. Wooden house in the deep forest. On May 23rd, the police finally located the house deep in the forest, just as Ma Lam had described. A Upon entering, they didn't find much at first glance, but in the bedroom drawer, they discovered a strange belt and 3 sturdy metal handcuffs, items not commonly found in an ordinary household. These were more likely the property of someone with power, possibly connected to a government official. This raised unsettling questions. Why were these official items in the house? And how did they connect to the kidnapped girls? Further investigation of the bedroom revealed 2 or 3 objects typically used in sexual games, found on the thick mattress. The task force began to suspect that the perpetrator might be someone within the government, someone with authority who had used these tools to abuse the young victims. It seemed plausible that the handcuffs had been used to restrain the girls, while the belt and sex toys served as instruments of torture. Although this was a reasonable assumption, it also suggested that the investigation was about to grow far more complex, with higher stakes involved. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the task force discreetly contacted the provincial police in Hac Long Giang for assistance. The provincial authorities responded swiftly, understanding the delicate nature of the case. While they waited for senior officers to launch their investigation, the Hac Long District Police turned their focus back to the forensic lab, eager for more details. After days of meticulous examination, the forensic team reported 3 critical findings on Diane Tan's body. First, they confirmed that the victim had died from strangulation, showing clear signs of suffocation. Second, they identified long bruises on her back and buttocks, consistent with being struck by a belt or a large ruler, matching the items found in the wooden house. But the most significant discovery was that traces of semen were found in the victim's vagina. Unfortunately, due to the advanced state of decomposition, the semen had dried, making immediate DNA testing difficult. However, forensic specialists found hair and beard remnants in the victim's pubic area. From these traces, the forensic doctors concluded that Diane Tan had been subjected to extreme sexual abuse before her death. The presence of hair and beard fragments suggested that the perpetrator had physically assaulted her, and in the struggle, these traces were left behind. The forensic doctors carefully extracted the samples for DNA testing. However, identifying the perpetrator would require matching the DNA with a suspect, and since no one had emerged as a primary suspect yet, the investigation reached a temporary standstill. Who was the person named R.a.p.e.d? On the morning of May 24th, the district task force received an unexpected notification from the provincial police chief. They had apprehended a suspect. The suspect was none other than Lineman, a 43-year-old provincial police chief. After receiving requests from lower-ranking officers, the provincial chief had quietly assigned a team to monitor Lineman's activities, closely observing his relationships and extracurricular behavior. In recent days, Lineman had displayed the most suspicious behavior among all the officials under scrutiny. The investigation team had noticed that important information sent by district police offices was not being relayed within the provincial headquarters. This raised the crucial question: why was this information being withheld? And who had the authority to orchestrate such a cover-up? These doubts led investigators to suspect that Lai Min himself was deliberately concealing the information, playing a role in some form of deception. The task force turned its full attention to Lai Min, suspecting he might be connected to the disappearances. Over the past few days, his behavior had become increasingly erratic. He had been frequently absent from work, especially in the days leading up to the incidents. Often, he didn't arrive at the office until early afternoon, despite being reprimanded multiple times by his superiors. Yet, he seemed unfazed, brushing off their concerns with indifference. A closer review of his work schedule revealed a troubling pattern. Lyman's absences coincided with 80% of the disappearances. This alarming discovery deepened the investigators' suspicions. The more they dug, the more concerning his behavior became. Testimony from another official, Dam Tuan, further fueled their doubts. Dam Tuan revealed that, even though Lyman was frequently absent, he still called him privately and instructed him to withhold all case files submitted by district police. Lai Min insisted on personally reviewing the files before passing them on to higher authorities. This was clear evidence of deliberate obstruction. Lai Min was likely tampering with or suppressing the case files before they could be properly reviewed by the provincial chief. Sensing Lai Min's malicious intent, Dam Tuan reported the situation to his superiors. The investigation team decided to dig deeper into Lai Min's personal life and uncovered a startling discovery. He had quietly moved into a mansion worth approximately 10 million renminbi. Additionally, his parents, who had been retired for years and lived modestly, were in the process of building a new apartment valued at around 20 million renminbi. This sudden change in his family's financial situation raised serious suspicions that Lai Min might be receiving illicit funds. With this mounting evidence, the team made the decision to arrest Lai Min for further investigation. His erratic work schedule and the abrupt financial improvement of his family became key pieces in unraveling more of the truth. But the investigation didn't end there. The team conducted a thorough examination of Lai Min's phone and discovered that he had been in regular contact with several unregistered numbers. These calls were made at odd hours, often late at night or in the early morning. This unusual behavior further solidified their suspicions that Lai Min was involved in shady dealings. To gather enough evidence, the investigators placed Lai Min in custody and began tracing the unregistered numbers he had contacted. Using electronic tracking devices, they pinpointed one of the numbers to a location near the border between the Kieu Dinh and Hac districts. Acting on this information, the task force ordered police in both districts to closely monitor any suspicious activity, particularly any blue dong phone trucks. After securing a warrant for Lai Min's arrest, the provincial police chief summoned the Hac Long District task force to compare the evidence they had gathered. The hair and beard samples found on Dian Tan's body were matched with those taken from Lai Min during his arrest. The results were undeniable, a perfect match. This confirmed that Lai Min was indeed the perpetrator responsible for raping and murdering Dian Tan. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Lai Min remained silent, refusing to admit to his crimes. His calm and composed demeanor suggested that, after years of dealing with criminal investigations, he was well versed in such situations. While the case of Dian Tan's murder was nearly solved, there wasn't yet enough evidence to prove that Lai Min was the mastermind behind the disappearances of the other missing girls. At this point, Lai Min's arrogance became apparent. He seemed resentful that he was being exposed and interrogated by his own police chief, maintaining an air of superiority. The investigation team decided to temporarily halt the interrogation, recognizing the need for more concrete evidence to ensure a conviction. Finally, on the evening of May 26th, a breakthrough occurred. The police in Hac Long Giang District reported to the provincial headquarters that they had captured 3 suspects believed to be Lai Min's accomplices. Along with the suspects, they also rescued 3 girls who had been tied up in the back of a truck. One of the girls was in critical condition, unconscious from exhaustion. All 6 individuals, 3 suspects and 3 victims, were found inside a blue dong phone truck with a red decal, matching Ma Lam's earlier description. The provincial police quickly transferred the 3 suspects to headquarters for questioning. Initially, the men were defiant, refusing to cooperate with investigators. However, under intense psychological pressure from the seasoned task force, their resistance crumbled. Eventually, they confessed. The suspects were identified as Han Dong, 35 years old, Tuong Tuan Kiet, and Du Chin, both 33 years old. They were key members of a secret criminal gang led by Lai Min. This gang specialized in high-interest loans and human trafficking, with Lai Min operating under the alias on Ba, a name unknown to the public. Lai Min paid his subordinates well, ensuring their loyalty. However, despite their initial resolve, the suspects couldn't withstand the interrogation techniques employed by the task force. Under pressure, they revealed that the string of mysterious disappearances had all been orchestrated by Lai Min. According to their confessions, the girls were first taken to Lai Min, who raped them to fulfill his twisted desires. Those he decided to sell into trafficking were treated more carefully, leaving no trace of their abduction. However, The girls he kept for his personal use were violently abused during sexual acts, with whips, handcuffs, and belts. The girls who fell into Lai Min's hands found themselves trapped in a hopeless situation. Some were sold to Russia, enriching Lai Min, while others were tortured and killed. In total, around 20 girls were abducted, with Lai Min selling more than 10 of them in recent months. Among the victims were Diane Tan, who was brutally murdered, and Ma Lam, who was fortunate enough to escape. Confess crime. With sufficient testimony and evidence, the police applied stronger measures, forcing Lai Min to confess. Under pressure, he finally broke down and admitted to his crimes. He confessed that during the rape of Diane Tan, she fiercely resisted, kicking him hard in the groin. Furious, he strangled her to death in a fit of rage, then disposed of her body by stuffing it into a suitcase, which his subordinates later dumped in the forest, where Lai Kwang's family discovered it. Lai Min further revealed that he had a house near the forest in Hac Long District, where he had assaulted Diane Tan and other girls. He had secretly built these houses to facilitate his human trafficking operation. His subordinates would frequent bars and restaurants, scouting young women, gathering their personal information, and reporting back to Lai Min, who would then choose his next victim. Confident in his authority, Lai Min believed he could cover up all his crimes without fear of legal consequences. However, his misdeeds were ultimately brought to light. He also confessed that victims like Lak Tin Shuyan, Neep Tan, Mak Lai, and Kieu Dinh had already been sold to Russia before Diane Tan's murder. Only the 3 girls recently rescued, along with Ma Lam, were fortunate enough to escape his trafficking ring. Outraged by the extent of his crimes, the task force demanded that Lai Min provide detailed information about the buyers of the trafficked girls in hopes of rescuing them and bringing them home. However, Lai Min could only provide information about one buyer. He claimed the rest were part of larger smuggling networks, and he had no further knowledge of where the other girls might be. The Hac Long Giang Provincial Police submitted a request to the central government, seeking permission to share information internationally to help locate the missing girls. However, after 2 months of searching, only 2 girls were recovered, and no trace of the others could be found. End of case. By the end of July 2009, the Hac Long Giang Provincial Police concluded their investigation, arresting Lai Min and his accomplices. The criminal network he led was dismantled, and the police successfully rescued the victims while seeking compensation for the damages they had suffered. Lai Min was swiftly stripped of his position, dismissed from government service, and had all his assets confiscated. He was sentenced to death, a punishment fitting for the atrocities he had committed. His accomplices received life sentences or varying prison terms, depending on the severity of their involvement. The mastermind behind the horror had finally paid the ultimate price. While some of the damage was repaired, many lives were left irreparably shattered by this gang. Some victims lost limbs due to debt, while others were sold overseas, their fate still unknown. Had this crime remained hidden, or been uncovered later, many more innocent lives would have been lost. The families of the victims live with unbearable pain, loss, and resentment. Although justice was served, their grief will never truly fade. As I delved deeper into this case, I found little information about the lives of the victims' families or about Lai Min's parents following the incident. This case was so severe that it had a direct impact on the internal workings of the Chinese police force. While it garnered widespread media attention at the time, 15 years later, it has largely faded from memory, leaving only the enduring pain of those who lived through it. Today's society is filled with complexities. Those who seem moral and hold positions of power, respected by many, can sometimes be the most cruel. They exploit their influence to commit unimaginable crimes. Unafraid of retribution, they live only to satisfy their desires, trampling on the rights and lives of those they consider beneath them. Lai Min is a prime example of a narcissist, a man who loved only himself and was willing to do anything to satisfy his lust. He is the result of allowing immoral individuals to hold positions of authority, cunning, cold-blooded people who, in the end, make the innocent suffer. The girls, their families, and countless others paid the price for his cruelty. In this era of materialism and greed, individuals like Lai Min find opportunities to commit such heinous crimes. It was greed that drove him to devise such elaborate schemes, and it was greed that led his henchmen to recklessly follow his orders without regard for the lives they destroyed. From this story, there are important lessons for all of us, especially women. Always stay vigilant and prioritize your safety. Consider learning self-defense techniques, such as martial arts, or develop the presence of mind, like Malam, to find a way out of dangerous situations. If you ever find yourself in such a predicament, remember that staying calm is key. Only by keeping calm can you give yourself the best chance of survival. What are your thoughts on the perpetrator in this case? Don't forget to like and subscribe to Decoder Box to hear more about the most chilling cases from around the world. Goodbye, and see you again in next videos.